poem. I guess I'll read some poems by other poets later.
Yes, yeah, I think we'll have some time. Yeah, if there's time, I could even, thank you. And I am so curious because there's such a range of different poets here, but
a lot of work.
Yes, I know, anthologizing. It's one of those things, you make more enemies than you do friends when you put together an anthology. So, Megha, in this book, you really talk about a number of different crises that we're kind of going through, from the ecological to the gender-based to class and race-based. And so I'm curious, what is it about poetry that makes it such a perfect vehicle to tackle these issues? I mean, you could certainly be doing work in public policy or in other arenas, but you tackle it in poetry. What is it about poetry?
So, thanks so much for the question. So, I, as a writer and as a poet, I've always believed, and we've also been witnessing that poetry has been a vehicle of social justice, not now, but for generations of generations. You know, since the time revolutionaries sang there, you know, they were singing on the streets, or the women marched on the Washington streets to fight for their reproductive rights, freedom, or recently when the Black Lives Matter, you know, movement galvanized the whole nation. So poetry has been like the core center, and it's not only a language of the common, but it's also a language of the elite. And I think in our times of like burgeoning technology and like extreme political and social divisiveness and polarization, poetry like still holds sway in how we communicate across ideologies, boundaries, cultures, and tradition. And it has this immense power to bring the people together, even if they are like polarized with their thoughts and opinion. It kind of bridges the people together, and that's the profound effect of poetry. And the other thing is, like, you know, you might read something on the news and you might forget it in a day or two, as we are bombed by this, like, you know, bombarded by this information from social media, from digital media, print media, and so on and so forth. But you hear a poet or you read a small poetry somewhere, and the profound effects of it stays with you for days and days, right? And as I always believe that, you know, as a writer, it's not only a responsibility to interpret and introspect the life, but also inform and shape the life around us. And I've always been moved by this quote by my favorite author and activist, Dr. Sonia Sanchez, when she says that all poets and writers are political. They either maintain the status quo or they say something's not right, let's change it for the better. So I think what better way is to do with poetry, which has such a profound effect, is to build the, you know, bridge and bring the people together.
Yes, and as it was Williams that said that poetry is news that stays news, right? So there is a certain kind of permanent aspect to it, and I really appreciate your advocacy on behalf of so many people in your poems.
Thanks.
And you know, Jhani, what was so interesting, and I want to come to the title poem of your book, and you could tell us why you chose to call your book Time Regime, but it's a really interesting poem. The first line is, I want to write about the mustache I am so softly growing, but feel the need to give it space and not actually write about it until I read the essay. And then you go on to actually then read the essay and then talk about your close reading of it and its connotations to the notion of the Punjabi and all of these. And there's a certain kind of meta move that you're making in which you're both reflecting and writing about the reflecting on your writing simultaneously. And I'm interested in that. I mean, is that part of your conception? And why did you want to title your collection Time Regime?
Thank you for this question.
That's great.
And also, I just want to say that both of your readings are really amazing. I'm still processing them, so if I'm slow to respond to your question, Dr. Shankar. Originally the collection, I think, was going to be called Gateway until I read this until I wrote this poem. And I want to say that I think it was going to be Gateway because I was thinking about thresholds. I was thinking about the kind of transformative power of the threshold and of crossing. And so earlier we were talking about borders in our panels and how borders are made to be crossed. I think that's really beautiful and profound. But I was thinking about what happens kind of around that, and then I was thinking about what does it mean to also cross borders of time, and I think something that's coming up for me today. I'm thinking about is as someone with kind of a really mixed heritage with lots of movement across continents around the entire world. How do I leap through time, and how do I leap through the kind of historical moves that block communities of color specifically from accessing an understanding of their experience of time, and it's a colonial issue. So I'm thinking in Time Regime, this poem that is very metatextual, I think I wanted to be very recursive in my questions, not to knot myself more deeply into not being able to find the answer, but actually as a modality of continuing to kind of think the body past time, and that's kind of a spiritual problem.
That's beautiful.
And I also want to say, I want to bring my friend Megan Pinto, who's a New York-based poet here. She recently came up to me and was like, "I love the idea of the poem as a failed essay. I'm trying that." And I was like, "Oh, you thought I failed?" I can take it. So, but I loved that too. I feel like Jack Halberstam, the queer theorist, has written about the queer art of failure, and that in this poem feels very kind of an integral idea as well, failing as kind of a power move, ultimately. I'll stop there.
I like that, failing as a power move. It reminds me of Gertrude Stein and Tender Buttons. A little bit, she talked about that. And well, there's so much that can be discussed about your anthology, Nishi, and there's a range, and in fact, those of you who are interested, after this we'll have the terrific poet Arundhati Subramaniam, who is represented in this anthology, and she'll be here among us. As is Vijay Seshadri, as I said, Joy Harjo, a number of global and Indian poets. And I was particularly, when I was reading through this, and I think that there are some artifacts that come from a moment of crisis that are transient, that kind of are just marking the passage of time. And there are others like this that really feel like kind of a permanent statement about what it was like to be alive for so many creative people around the world. And when I was flipping through this, I saw that I was really taken by these poems by Hildebrando Perez Grandes, and I was looking at poems, a Peruvian poet living in Lima, and lo and behold, Nishi actually translated his work, so I was hoping you could maybe talk about both the span and expanded range, and if there's time, I would love to share my poem from this anthology.
Why don't you read the Peruvian poet's poem yourself, because you would be able to read it in Spanish better than I've translated it in English, and it was a daunting task for me, but then it was.
Okay, I can read this one first poem, which really there's a bit of howling in it, but I think it's that we're at the time in the afternoon that howling is okay. Right? So yes, this is called Howling. Introduce me into your arteries. What else I would like to be your blood, your delirium, your favorite song. Light up the river of tigers. Derailed, they knock us out. Already, I don't know if it's the ambulance, the one that goes through the deserted streets to help someone, to someone, or am I the one dying? Moriamondo, to die loving. Those who are about to die call for help, help, help. Tonight, that you will never forget the truth. I just keep on howling. Oh! Oh! And the ambulance, like you, without mercy, ignores me.
How beautiful. Yes. How beautiful. How beautifully read. Thank you, thank you. Thank you, Dr. Shankar. Poetry is somehow a place where you feel you can easily unleash yourself, you know. You write out, you write back, you kind of write indecorously, you write with intensity, you write with passion. And to my mind, some of the greatest poets are Latin American poets. And thank you for, suggesting that you like the translation without knowing much Spanish and with the help of Google Translate. But I guess, whatever I feel whatever I do a good job of it. And even the publisher, so you did compare it with the original, right?
I did, yeah.
Thank you. So I did ask a Peruvian economist friend of mine, but he was kind of not very comfortable doing that. But coming back to that, Dr. Shankar, you and all three of you are suggesting the activist aspect of poetry, whereas, we've always imagined and visualized, so to say, poetry as a very private sphere. And anthologies also, it just gives me the idea that anthologies can also have a manifesto-like quality about it, so to say, long-handedly. It's like, poetry is a very temporal art. It's like within the, and here are these poets, so to say, when I ask, all the Latin American poets, the American poets, the European poets, I asked them. Dr. Sachidanandan, of course, asked a lot of the Indian poets. He's big in India. So, of course, they put his name first also. That's okay, that's kind of, that's perfectly fine by me. I got it published, and that's kind of my goal and objective. But anthologies, interestingly, are not held in as high esteem as different other genres of poetry. But of course, I think it does have a manifesto-like quality when you ask poets to talk about their sense of anguish, trauma, their existential questions and preoccupations with how were they bothered by, how were they impacted by, so that it becomes a beautiful, so to say, chorus of, should we say, cultures, so to say.
Yeah.
Yes. If I'm talking too much, did I stop you, prevent you from reading your poem?
Oh, no. I'm happy to also contribute. I mean, I think it's such a fine and also beautifully produced book. And I would like to each of the authors is kind of in black, and then you have the work in white, and it really does manifest this idea of singing in the dark.
But we are going to, I'm sorry if I'm interjecting, Penguin Random House is bringing out another anthology of ours, Sachidanandan and mine, Greening the Earth. So we suggested to our publisher, Elizabeth, we said don't kind of, keep the bios, the resumes, the short clipped resumes of all the poets right at the end, because it's kind of taking up a huge chunk of of the pages.
Right. Yes, we want more poems.
I mean, you look at it politically.
Yeah.
Yes, you look at it as an artist, black and white. And, I mean, that's a good way of looking at it. Yeah. But please, over to you.
Yes, I was really pleased to be asked, and I'll just share with you. I mean, we heard about some of the losses that were happening in India, and this was the moment for me when COVID really hit home. There was someone at the cashier at my local grocery store who passed away, and I only found out about when I read about her in the newspaper. And so this is my little COVID poem. It's called Latin for Life, which is what the name of this woman, Vitalina, meant. Latin for life. A migraine so jasmine that it clings to the cortex like a floor-length drape that obscures any view from the window. Copley Square shines barren of the unmasked, and even they are scant, dispersed among the traces of spring, which begin invisibly in the damp smell of earth and the tentative buds of silver maples. Am I getting sick? Are you well? A virus inhabits the gray zone beneath the animate and inanimate, spreads unseen from touch, breath, the very qualities that make us human. Staying at home isn't a personal choice, it's an ethical duty. urges a retweeted headline while I eat my yogurt. It's also the purview of the privileged, those of us who can Zoom from home and still collect a paycheck. The woman who bagged my groceries, Guatemalan, is dead. I just read about her in the Boston Globe and recognized her by her half smile, by her fingers. Vitalina Williams was her name, and she's survived by a husband who could not get close enough to her in the hospital to say goodbye. He tells the reporter, nobody's to blame and everybody's to blame. She wasn't given a mask because there weren't any. The man who unloaded pallets of dairy products from the back of a tractor trailer might be getting sick, and the migrant workers who work on farms might be exposing themselves to deadly pathogens so that we can all stay safe. That's democracy now. That's the line between the haves and the have-nots. There's a metaphor here, I think, hating myself for thinking figuratively in the face of literal work. How a virus attaches to a host cell, then penetrates to replicate itself until it bursts from the membrane, killing its host. It's stunning to see under the eye of an electron microscope, aesthetically pleasing even, a haloed Helen Frankenthaler abstraction. Although all I can see in mid-morning's throbbing light is Vitalina's dark eyes and her brown fingers meticulously sorting the pasta sauce into one bag and the eggs into another so that they won't break. Yes, so thank you for that indulgence, but it really, I think this book really is quite extraordinary and such an array, and you intentionally wanted to make it global, clearly, though it's published by Penguin India.
Yes.
Yeah, that was part of
we
your...
open it up to to poets from across the globe. Arundhati is here, of course.
Yes.
Yes. So,
well, I think it would be great to hear something else from everyone before we finish, but I also want to leave a little time for any questions. So I don't know how we're doing on time.
I think we're very close to it. It's 48.
why don't you?
Yeah.
Open for questions, okay. All right, so...
Open for questions? Oh, okay.
Yes, all right.
So first, Ravi, thank you for putting this incredible panel. The word that came into my mind is sledgehammer poets. Now, why do I use the word sledgehammer? I'm still bouncing around with the line, does a cry have a religion? Loving the virus inside me. And then, we all know about unequal time, but you are the first person since the dawn of history to argue that time has inequity. So my question to all three of you is this. We have always accepted the poet as Brahman, as a great creator. But in all of you, I sense there is a bit of shock that you also see your role to dissolve before you can create. That dissolution aspect, challenging the comfort zone we are in, is that something within you that you sense that, hey, I have to dissolve conventional thinking before the hearer can really absorb what I am trying to create? Your thoughts? Of the dual role, the dissolver and the creator.
Yeah. So I think we as a poets and a creative artists, not only as a poets, right, as like writers and of other genres as well, we are always living in this dichotomy of, creating and, challenging the norms in our lives. And we always, because I'm also a literary activist, and I think as an activist as well as a poet, it's a dual responsibility of me to challenge also, while at the same time also I educate myself of what's happening around, and I think that's responsibility of creating at the same time in response to whatever is like stimulating you, and it is also response of break down the barriers for others to follow. And you have to always give that inspiration to other people. That's always right to challenge people in authorities and always speak truth to power, because until and unless you don't do that, you become stagnant and you become a part of a system. And it's not about breaking the system, but it's about making the changes which is equitable and it's available to everyone. So as you said, and in our Hindu Vedic thing also, we have Lord Shiva and Lord Brahma and Lord Vishnu, and these three energies are like together running the universe in syncopation, right? And that's what it always gives us the right, is to not only challenge the authorities but also be creative and inspiring at the same time. So yeah, this is a duality in every creative artist, and this duality is the passion which makes us move forward and creates us something, you know, which are passionate hearts and mind, which will like, you know, rise and it will catch fire and burn for the next person to follow.
Thank you. Thank you for this question too. I really love what you said, so I'm going to try not to repeat my thoughts because it resonates all with me too. But I do want to say that I think I actually come to this idea of time as deeply inequitable from Afro-pessimism. So from, in particular, Black poets like E.B. Shockley and Doug Kearney, and also the scholar Kevin Wilkerson, so teaches at UCI in California. So definitely I owe homage to African American and Black Afro-pessimists and Afro-futurists as well, in thinking through that. And so kind of something else I wanted to think about with the dichotomy of destruction and creation is really those things. The dichotomy exists as well as the deep interconnection between them. So that separation, I think, is really real, but in creation is destruction, is sacrifice, is a door closed. So that's something I think about with thresholds too, is what is at our back, but may eventually come and be facing us in the front again. I think as a thinker, I try to move in the shadows of both.
Well, these are wonderful poets, young and very different from an rather older poet in my early 60s, you know, who's had a very academic training in poetry and literature and been a professor of English literature, all of that. But so that definitely, you know, it's a very valid question. Now, poetry is, so to say, a discourse that's constructed around the principle, an epistemological principle of the unique, so to say, right? You imagine that poetry addresses the unique, but, you know, when you have, so to say, a chorus of cultures, so to say, multicultural poets writing about something that, you know, it's like within that same public sphere, within they are addressing a single subject matter and the same theme, so to say. So it is promoting our sense of diversity, our sense of kindred humanity. And it's rather ironical that a virus, you know, the virus that was guiding, so to say, our transformed reality, that had riddled our transformed sense of reality, was actually making us think about how all of us are kindred in so many diverse ways. So poets are definitely restless innovators who are, they're just not the passive kinds who are there to kind of unify or make us think alike. The ideal of unity definitely is something that poetry and poets need to promote, but poets are also restless innovators who want to disrupt and break free, so to say. Like, you know, the Japanese writer Yukio Mishima, one of his short stories, I still can't get over it. He writes that poetry is something that, you know, that robs, attacks, butchers you, and then, you know, kind of makes you see the reality, so to say, that ultimate sense of beauty about it. So yes, we need to dispel, we need to shed, we need to deconstruct, you know, those traditional ideas about poetry, and think about poetry as what, you know, my colleagues here, my peers here are kind of, revealing to all of us. Poetry does have a political aspect about it, that sense of activism about it. We need to think about that. I'll give things over to you too.
Great, thank you. Wonderful answers. Others, questions before we end? I thought I'd seen another hand. Yes.
I just want to ask Jhani.
Yes.
You mentioned about how time is the body, right? And telling these stories when sort of colonial time is sort of, could you just talk a little bit more about that? Because I found that interesting.
Ooh. I'm getting just like an impressionistic answer. Would you mind asking it one more time for me?
So you mentioned about in the beginning, we were talking about bodies and in time, and how bodies of color have been forced to reckon with the past through colonial time in a sense. So could you speak a little bit more about that?
Thank you. Yes, I can try. So I think, something that feels actually really personal that I think I'll bring in that speaks also to your collection is that so both of my grandparents passed away kind of due to COVID, and they were my grandparents Mohinder and Jaswant. They lived in the UK, and I was thinking about the most recent kind of unceremonious list, the unceremony of their deaths, and the kind of act of forgetting in the precise moment that I think their children who were born in Kenya under British rule right before a revolution in Kenya kind of had exhibited. And I was thinking about how that kind of severing of a relationship to the body in time, especially as bodies kind of carry so many histories intergenerationally, cellularly. We carry memories of viruses that live in our bodies. Anyway, so I don't have like a solid answer, but I have it's impressions.
You're a poet, so you're not.
But I think I'm thinking about that kind of severing of the body from its memory via colonialism, capitalism. I'm thinking about that a lot. I think in the work, and I hope the work is thinking for me, because I'm running out of thoughts today.
Well, and I think that there has been more and more evidence of intergenerational trauma and the way that it's kind of encoded in our bodies and passed on those histories. Well, I think that brings us to the end of this fabulous hour. Let us get another huge hand for all of our poets here. I believe some of them have books. I hope you will stay for our next session with Arundhati. And then there will be some nibbles and some wine, I believe. So further enticement.
Actually, we should go and get the wine.
Ah.
And bring it to the session.
Okay.
Life is so unfair to poets. We use the poets to bring the wine. All the prose guys are drinking. So let's take a break for 5 minutes.
Yeah.
All this stuff. Get it done.
Thank you so much.
Oh, yeah. So interesting.
I love hearing all of the work. I feel they just all lock into each other in really special. It's really special ways. So I'm so appreciative to both of you.
I want to say thank you so much.
Yes, thank you. And tell Sachi also. Please give my best to Sachi.
Yes, thank you. Thank you.
Aaron, how is he
Maybe
doing?
we'll bring it. Not doing too well.
He's not doing too
yes.
well. I knew
They've
you.
retired and bought a house and
Ravi Shankar isn't standing because he has another session to moderate.
Oh, let's all take a picture. Wait. Will you take one on mine too, of all of us, please? Yeah.
Priya, you give me yours, okay?
Yeah, I don't have to like.
I'm so glad. I'm so honored. Yes.
You have to take this
Yes.
off, otherwise it will
Yes.
come out very bad. I'll do it for you.
Yes, I fell and broke my teeth and my mouth also. It tore my lip.